A red and blue glow flickered through the rear windshield, reflecting off the dashboard like an ominous warning. Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter gripped the wheel, her heartbeat steady, trained through years of intense military service. This wasn't a war zone, but something about the situation sent a familiar tension through her body, one she had felt many times before, yet never quite like this. She pulled over to the side of the quiet road, the hum of her engine fading into the night. The officer's heavy boots crunched on the pavement as he approached, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Naomi took a deep breath, watching through the side mirror as he placed a hand on his holster. She had been trained to read body language, and this man was already on edge. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice carrying an air of forced authority. His nameplate read Officer Travis Reed. Naomi moved slowly, her every action measured. "Is there a reason I was pulled over, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice calm but firm. Reed's eyes narrowed. "You matched the description of a suspect involved in a robbery nearby." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. A suspect? She was wearing her official Navy fitness jacket, her hair neatly tied back. There was nothing about her that remotely matched a robbery suspect. But she knew better than to argue. "I just left base 15 minutes ago," she said, handing over her ID along with her documents. "I have nothing to do with any robbery." Reed barely glanced at her military identification before scoffing. "You military types always think you're above the law." Naomi remained composed. "Not at all, officer. I simply know my rights." The second she said it, she saw the shift in his expression, a mix of annoyance and something else. A challenge. He wanted submission, not confidence. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Naomi hesitated. On what grounds? That was all it took. Before she could process what was happening, Reed yanked the door open, his grip tightening around her wrist as he pulled her out. Her military training kicked in, years of self-defense techniques, discipline, and patience. But she knew that fighting back would only make things worse. "Turn around. Hands on the car." Reed barked, shoving her against the vehicle. Naomi clenched her jaw as the cold metal pressed against her chest. She had been trained to endure worse, but the humiliation burned deeper than any battlefield wound. Then the worst part came. "You're resisting arrest," Reed muttered with a smirk. Naomi's heart pounded. "I'm not resisting anything." But the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, sealing her fate. In that moment, Naomi knew, this wasn't just a routine stop. This was about something much bigger than her. And it was only the beginning. Naomi sat in the back of the squad car, her hands still cuffed behind her, her breathing steady despite the anger simmering inside her. She had faced threats before, but nothing quite like this. She wasn't just being detained, she was being framed. Reed sat in the front seat, typing into his onboard computer, occasionally glancing at her through the rearview mirror with a smug expression. The streetlights flickered as they drove through the city, the silence thick between them. Naomi's mind raced. What was his endgame? A simple traffic stop had turned into something far more sinister. As they pulled into the station, Reed exited the car first, opening the door roughly. "Move," he ordered, yanking her forward. She steadied herself. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get your phone call," he muttered, leading her inside. The holding area was dimly lit, the air stale. Naomi had seen plenty of interrogation rooms in her line of work, but never from this side of the table. She was pushed into a chair, her cuffs removed just as another officer, Sergeant Daniels, entered the room. He looked older, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Reed stood with his arms crossed. "Caught her loitering near the gas station. Matched the description of the robbery suspect." Daniels frowned, looking at Naomi. "That true?" Naomi held his gaze. "No. I was checking my GPS. I had just left the naval base. This is a mistake." Reed scoffed. She resisted arrest. "Put up a fight." Daniels narrowed his eyes, his gaze flickering between Naomi and Reed. Something wasn't adding up, and Naomi could see the uncertainty in his face. But before he could press further, another officer entered, holding a small bag. "Sir, we found this in her car." Naomi's stomach dropped as the officer placed a small bag of white powder onto the table. "What?" she said, her voice calm but firm. "That's not mine." Reed leaned in, a smirk playing at his lips. "Sure it isn't?" Naomi clenched her fists under the table. This wasn't just profiling. This was a setup. She took a slow breath. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea who I am." Reed chuckled. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. And none of that matters now." But he had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was packed. Spectators murmured in anticipation, some exchanging knowing glances while others sat stiffly, their eyes locked onto the front of the room. The weight of the moment pressed down on Naomi as she sat at the defendant's table, her hands resting on the cold wood. She had faced war zones, enemy ambushes and high-stakes missions, but this was different. Officer Travis Reed sat across the room, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. He knew he had the upper hand. The system was built to protect men like him. Naomi had seen this play out before, too many innocent people crushed under the gavel of injustice. But today she wasn't just another defendant. Today she was prepared for battle. The judge, an older man with piercing eyes, took his seat. "Let's proceed," he said, his tone sharp and businesslike. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man named William Hayes, stood and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have here a case of a dangerous individual caught with illegal substances. The arresting officer, a decorated member of our police force, acted swiftly to remove a threat from our streets." Naomi barely contained her scoff. A threat? She had spent 2 decades defending the very country that now put her on trial with lies. Marcus Langston, Naomi's fierce attorney, leaned in. "He's lying through his teeth." Naomi's jaw tightened. "I know." But as Marcus began to unravel Reed's dark history, Naomi saw it, the first crack in Reed's armor. The prosecutor's words hung heavy in the air, painting Naomi as a menace rather than the decorated Navy officer she was. But Naomi knew one thing: truth had a way of surfacing no matter how deep it was buried. Officer Travis Reed sat tall in the witness stand, his confidence unwavering. He had done this before, lied, twisted facts and walked away without consequence. To him this was just another day in court. "Officer Reed," Marcus Langston began, standing before the jury, his expression sharp, calculated. "Can you confirm for the court that you pulled over my client because she matched the description of a robbery suspect?" Reed smirked. "That's correct." Marcus nodded, flipping through his papers. "And what was that description exactly?" Reed hesitated for the briefest second before saying, "African-American woman, mid-30s, short hair." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, suppressing the fire that burned within her. Marcus turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's examine that description, shall we? The actual suspect, caught on surveillance footage, is 23 years old, 5'3", and has long braided hair. My client, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter, is 39, 5'8", and serves as a high-ranking officer in the United States Navy." The shift in the room was palpable. Naomi watched as doubt began to creep into the jurors' expressions. Marcus wasn't done. "Tell me, Officer Reed, did you even check her ID before claiming she was the suspect?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. She was acting suspicious." Marcus let the silence stretch. "Suspicious, how?" Reed's jaw clenched. "She was hesitant. Asked unnecessary questions." Naomi's attorney took a step closer. "You mean she asked for the reason behind the stop?" "The same right granted to every citizen under the law." The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed it. Marcus turned back to Reed, his next move ready. "Let's talk about the alleged drugs found in her car." Reed straightened. "They were in plain sight." Marcus smiled, a small knowing smirk. He reached for a folder and handed a document to the bailiff. "Your Honor, these are forensic results from the evidence submitted. That bag of drugs tested negative for illegal substances. In fact, it contained nothing but powdered sugar." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Naomi's fingers tightened against the table. Reed shifted in his seat, but Marcus wasn't done. "And then there's this." He turned to the bailiff, who wheeled in a TV screen. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a video played, grainy but clear enough. A bystander's cell phone footage. It showed Reed reaching into Naomi's car, moments before he discovered the bag. The air in the courtroom turned ice cold. The judge leaned forward. "Officer Reed, do you have an explanation for this?" Reed's face turned pale. Marcus didn't let him finish. "Your Honor, this is more than racial profiling. This is fabrication of evidence, a blatant attempt to frame an innocent woman, and a direct abuse of power." The weight of his words settled over the room. The jury exchanged looks. The judge turned to the prosecutor, his expression dark. "Does the state wish to continue?" The prosecutor stood slowly, his face grim. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant." A beat of silence. The motion granted. "Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter, you are free to go." The gavel slammed down. Reed's world shattered in an instant. But for Naomi, the fight wasn't over yet. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of gasps and hushed whispers as Naomi exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The chains of false accusations had been broken, but she knew the battle wasn't just about her freedom. It was about the system that allowed officers like Travis Reed to operate without consequence. As Naomi stood, she turned to her attorney, Marcus Langston, who gave her a small nod. The job was done. But Naomi? She wasn't finished. Before she could leave the courthouse, a swarm of reporters flooded the hallway. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in her direction. Lieutenant Carter, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you believe race played a factor in your arrest? What do you plan to do next? Naomi held up a hand, silencing the chaos. She took a steady breath, then spoke with the same unwavering confidence that had carried her through countless military operations. This case was never just about me, she began. It was about the thousands of people who never got the chance to fight back. About the names that became hashtags, the stories that were buried, the voices that were silenced. She looked directly into the cameras. Today justice was served. But the fact that I had to fight this hard for something that should have never happened in the first place? That's the real issue. A silence settled over the crowd. Even the reporters, trained to move quickly from one headline to the next, seemed to understand the weight of her words. Then from the back of the crowd, a voice called out. Lieutenant Carter, did you know Officer Reed has been placed under investigation? Naomi's brows lifted slightly. That was fast. Another reporter chimed in, reading from their phone. Internal Affairs just announced that all of Officer Reed's past cases are being reviewed. Some are being overturned already. Naomi exchanged a glance with Marcus. This wasn't just a small victory, it was the start of something much bigger. Travis Reed, the man who had tried to destroy her life, had unknowingly destroyed his own. A week later, Naomi sat across from a news anchor in a nationally televised interview. Her case had ignited a firestorm across the country. People were protesting, demanding reforms. Departments were forced to take a harder look at their policies. But Naomi knew awareness wasn't enough. Change required action. So what's next for you? The anchor asked. Naomi leaned forward. I dedicated my life to defending this country abroad. Now, I'm dedicating my life to defending people right here at home. The anchor tilted her head. Are you saying you're going into activism? Naomi gave a small smile. I'm saying I'm just getting started. Naomi stood on a stage before a packed auditorium, her name now synonymous with police accountability and justice reform. As she spoke, she saw the faces of people who had been wrongfully accused, who had lost loved ones to injustice, who had been waiting for someone to fight for them. This isn't about taking sides, she told the crowd. It's about making sure the people who swear to protect us are actually held to that standard. A thunderous applause filled the room. Naomi looked out, knowing this was where she belonged. She wasn't just a victim of injustice. She was the spark that would help dismantle it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's continue to shine a light on racial injustice and push for real change. Every voice matters. Join the movement. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.